So Cancer, your February forecast on the screen, your event chart, your ruler, the moon, on that fated 29th degree as we enter February, but later on the 1st, moves into Leo and goes face to face with the sun. So you have a full moon, which will provide a very powerful backdrop for the first 2 weeks of this month. And just in a very practical way, that could see you trying to balance the ins and outgoings of your finances. The 8th house very much about your future, and the second house, where the moon is, very much about the immediate position. So that's everyday money, can be your sense of self-worth, your values, but also a need for stability. Now the 8th house is much more to do with the connection to others, and it can be where we're very devoted. And because there's such a cluster of energy there as you come into this month, if there is someone you're aligning with positively, this really could be very special. The evolution, the transformation that goes on can see you stepping into a much deeper commitment. But ironically, the converse can be true too, because the 8th house can be where things come to a close too. So whether it's spiritually, whether it's in terms of long-term financial planning, whether it's business ideas, partnerships, or in a romantic dimension, you're going to find out this month whether there is a true connection or not. And that is amplified really by the role of Jupiter. Jupiter is exalted in your zodiac sign, but currently remains retrograde. But if we go back to when Jupiter arrived in May, it clashed immediately with Saturn, and they came into an exact square in the middle of June. So that wasn't really very welcoming, because Jupiter visits our sign every 11 or 12 years. And for you this time, that didn't give you that uplift you'd ordinarily expect. But as we go into this month, please just see that Jupiter is in a discordant angle to Venus and Mercury. On the face of it, forging a beautiful, delightful conjunction as we enter the month. And if you are in any way doing something thoughtful around marshalling your long-term finances, squeezing a bit more from them, perhaps flexing in some ways, but it's to do with pensions, savings, inheritances or legacies, that Venus-Mercury conjunction very helpful. Where it can be tested is that Jupiter can be overconfident. So if there is a situation that you want to manifest on an individual basis, but you do need to connect or support, or you do need the support from others, perhaps a financial institution, you will need to make sure that whatever you're proposing is going to be feasible. However, the other energy at the very start of this month is that Pluto-Mars conjunction, because that's hot, but it's very impulsive. And it's very much to do with desire. So just be aware that you could be drawn towards someone, perhaps, or something, maybe an expensive item that might not necessarily be good for you. So just bear that in mind. But on the 4th, Uranus, the planet of freedom, independence and higher truth, which has been rotating backwards through the heavens for the last 5 months, does go direct. Now, it started that journey for you in the part of your chart to do with what's hidden, not obvious, the more psychological domain. More recently, it's been perhaps asking some questions about your connections as far as friendships are concerned, alliances, your network, but also your higher purpose. And that higher purpose, to be honest, despite Uranus going direct, is going to be tested as you go on through this month. But you do have Mercury arriving in your fellow water sign of Pisces on the 6th, followed by Venus on the 10th. Now, Venus loves being in Pisces, but Mercury most certainly doesn't. Mercury thrives on clarity, on accuracy. The sign of Pisces can be very, very opaque. So if you are discussing anything of a contractual nature, or anything to do with a travel plan, or you're taking some legal advice, it will be very important to make sure that all the details are really very clear. Venus, however, particularly if there has been intensity around a romantic situation, can help you to get in touch with what the truth is for you. But if you do have a love of travel, breaking out, visiting different places, Venus moving through Pisces can be absolutely delicious. But on the 14th, we do have Saturn return to Aries. If you recall, on the 25th of May last year through to the 1st of September, Saturn joined Neptune right at the top of your chart. It may have coincided with a time when you took on more responsibility in the wider world. A promotion, started your own enterprise. Perhaps it was to do with the family, maybe something to do with a property. But because Saturn rotated back into the part of your chart, it's very much to do with your need to adhere to your values, to be in touch with what's really important to your higher principles. You perhaps have not been quite so connected to that worldly part of your chart. Now, Neptune, of course, moved there on the 26th of January, may have created some hope to do something more creative. Saturn is going to be here for the longer term, just like Neptune, but not as long as Neptune. So over the next couple of years, if you really do want to build up your profile, you want to gain greater recognition, you have a clear path in mind towards something you want to achieve success with, the harder you work, the more application you put in, the more perspiration you generate, the greater the chance you will have a breakthrough. But as ever with Saturn, that can be the reward. It is the planet of outcomes and consequences. But in the sign of Aries, it's not its best location, because Aries can be about new beginnings. And if you're involved in something professionally that you're not truly enjoying, I feel that there could be a little bit of a pinch point. And that can become more obvious to you when on the 17th of this month, the new eclipse series, beginning with a annular solar eclipse in the sign of Aquarius, squares off with Uranus, now travelling forwards. And Uranus is in that part of your chart to do with being a bit more idealistic, whereas the solar eclipse in the part of your chart to do with where you're very deeply invested. But Uranus, of course, can be the planet of freedom. So if there's any situation in your life that you feel a bit controlled around, hemmed in, it's not quite working for you, the way Saturn might show up is there may be a need to liberate yourself from one situation, but in order to solve that issue, you may have to take on more responsibility. But on the 18th, the Sun moves into the final zodiac sign, and the next 4 weeks, Pisces season, very much about that more spiritual, emotional dimension, can be quite psychological, but for you it is about freedom. So if something's causing some pressure in your situation, you can release yourself from it with that solar eclipse, but you may have to take on something else to replace the thing that perhaps was challenging. Now on the 20th, we do have Saturn and Neptune come into a conjunction for the first time since 1987, when the Berlin Wall came down. What's going to happen here? Neptune can be about idealism, it can be about a higher spiritual purpose, but the sign of Aries is a new beginning. The one thing I would say about this aspect, they're both connected to Pluto, which is about our collective connection, particularly in Aquarius, something shifting. But I feel that if you have to perhaps consider an alteration around your work, you will have to be mindful of the financial implications of that. And all of this can get you thinking quite actively from the 26th, when Mercury goes into its retrograde. Now, we all know that Mercury retrogrades can be tricky when it comes to technology, whether it's travelling places, glitches in the system, cancelled flights, ferries that are affected by industrial action. That's pretty mainstream for Mercury retrogrades. But for you, the ninth house. But because the host, Pisces, is water, I think anything to do with distribution or travel around water could be affected. But you're also being asked to get in touch with the emotional side of your being, because you start this month trying to balance the books, but also balance where you stand in your connection to others. And if you're not feeling it, one of the things you can gain from the Mercury retrograde is to get in touch and deeply work through and be mindful of your soul purpose. And that could be something that really calls out to you as this month draws to a close, because Jupiter forges an absolutely delicious link to Venus in the last few days of February, which could prove to be very fortunate for you personally. This can show itself up by the resistance you may have felt with Jupiter's discordant connection to Mercury and Venus at the start of the month, because Jupiter links much better to Venus towards the end of the month, and Venus and Jupiter come back into a conjunction as February comes to a close. That need to be doing something that serves your higher purpose and yet liberates you, even if it does have some responsibilities and obligations, is going to be much more to the fore. And we also have Mars clashing with Uranus in the last week of this month. So if you do once again experience, perhaps in a romantic situation, someone being too possessive, controlling, jealous, limiting, using leverage in some kind of way, Uranus is going to see you push back on that very strongly this month. So although I feel a lot of the publicity around February will focus quite rightly on Saturn returning to Aries, and we will have a lot of attention to on the solar eclipse, I actually feel Uranus gives us a lot of insights to how this may feel for you. Because Uranus, whilst it's still in Taurus, even though it's been for us all collectively a very, very tricky transit full time, apart from the 4 months last year in Gemini, ever since March 2019, for you personally, it's perhaps given you a chance to actually do something that's much more in keeping with your higher principles. So in other words, expressing your more authentic self. So I think to summarise this month for you, Cancer, some real life opportunities are there in terms of the tangible part of life, the second, 8th house, money. But it could be that something you're rather attached to may need challenging with that full moon the first 2 weeks. And you may know about that attachment because, for example, you may be doing a job that's well paid that you don't really enjoy, or perhaps you don't like the people very much, or within the organisation you're not given a chance to flourish in terms of your individual talent. That's all very Uranian, to be honest. But Saturn's saying to you that to liberate yourself from one situation, you may have to take on more obligations in another way. And as long as you're conscious of that, I think the Pisces energy threaded through the latter part of this month do and will give you a chance to be much more in touch with what really works for you at the more spiritual, soulful level. Thank you so much for joining me. Please do like, hype or comment the video. If you've yet to subscribe, do so now. And please also join me at patrickarundel.com. We've made even more changes to the website and it's really coming together now. If you've yet to order your personal forecast for the next 12 months, please see the link below and get half price, 50% off.